Hi, this is Rich Barcum with Cardinal Compliance Consultants, and I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon on how to fix your safety program. Just a couple of real quick housekeeping items. I do have everybody muted to cut down on background noise, and if you have any questions, type those in the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of our webinar this afternoon. If you are interested in receiving a certificate for towards the Ohio BWC 2-hour safety program, I need to make sure that you've listed your email address when you logged in, and we will make sure that we get that sent out to you within the next week or so. So with that, I want to go ahead and get started, introduce our speakers. I said my name is Rich Barcum, I'm the owner of Cardinal Compliance. I'm a certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, and a certified hazardous materials manager. I have been managing health and safety programs in some way, shape, or form for, let's say, approximately the last 30 some odd years. What we're going to try to get across today, what I'm going to try to get across today is some of the things that I've seen that have caused problems, some of the things that I've seen that have worked really well. And hopefully you can get some information and take that back to your facility and get some knowledge and hopefully help take your safety program from wherever it's at right now to that next level. Also with me today co-presenting is Jim Morris. Jim is a safety consultant with Cardinal, and he's a certified safety professional. And like myself, Jim has a multitude of years, not as many years, but a multitude of years of managing various levels of health and safety programs. And what's cool about what we're going to talk about today is don't really care if you're in general industry, manufacturing, if you're a tool shop, that's really, or construction, that's largely irrelevant. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to be universal across a variety of different industries. So our objectives today, in order for us to fix any problem, we have to understand, number one, where we are, and I think even more importantly, we have to understand why we're there. Have to understand, you know, what's gotten us to where we are right now. You know, if you're really good, you want to understand why you're really good so you can keep doing that stuff. If your safety program is really in a state of disrepair, or, you know, in my world of bluntness, if it stinks, you want to understand why you ended up there, so you're not repeating a lot of those same mistakes over and over and over again. Want to understand what you want to be. Want to understand, you know, where you are, why you got there, where do you want to go with your safety program, and, you know, do you want a Cadillac? Do you want a Buick? Do you want a Lamborghini? Do you want a smart car? Any of them's okay as long as you understand where you want to be, and then we're going to talk about how do you get there, how do you bridge that gap from, you know, where you are right now to where you want to where you want to end up. So, pitfalls. This was kind of that, you know, where are we? Well, how do we end up where we're at? So pitfalls. A variety of things come into play when you do run into some of these common mistakes. That's what we're going to call a pitfall, these common mistakes that many companies make with regards to their overall safety program. Number one, pitfalls can stem from just a pure lack of knowledge. You don't know what you don't know, so to speak. If you have a silica exposure in your workplace and you're not up to speed on your silica regulation, well, you're going to have some problems just because you haven't done your homework, you haven't gotten up to speed on what's relevant for your workplace. Laziness. What I mean by laziness is just what it says. You're not putting in the work to make sure that you're keeping your program relevant, you're keeping it on point, you're keeping it up to date, You're keeping it interesting. You're keeping it manageable, easy to do. Poor maintenance. We've all been in that situation, and where we've had a manager that a problem arises, and that manager has what we call that knee-jerk reaction, right? That knee-jerk reaction where, okay, all of a sudden, because we have a problem, we're putting in a fix, a solution, and we put that in, and it's like what I'm going to call it, in a vacuum. We just put it in without regard to anything else, and it sounds great on the surface, right, Jim? And then a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year later, we pull that same program off the shelf, and what have we done with it? We've done nothing. That's a knee-jerk reaction, right? So not maintaining your program is a huge pitfall. You know, we write this great program, and then all of a sudden it just sits there and it stagnates, it festers, it rots, whatever you want to call it. And lastly, poor leadership. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say most companies, in some way, shape, or form, suffer from poor leadership. And poor leadership isn't necessarily you don't care, isn't necessarily they're not giving safety the lip service or even the attention that it deserves. What poor leadership is I'm not giving it the attention that it needs in the way that it needs it. And we're going to get into some semantics with this and how do you communicate this stuff. So we're going to walk through a lot of these common pitfalls in terms of why do you get there and then how do you fix those.
So, Rich, one thing I've noticed over the last 9 years is a lot of companies have very generic programs and policies. And you know, back to laziness, I've seen several safety managers and even safety directors, they'll take a written program, they'll take a training program from one company that's in, you know, such and such industry. They'll move to another company that maybe not in the same industry, and they'll try to just change the name and consistently reapply the same safety policies, same programs out there. Well, that's kind of like if you think about it, back when you were in high school, when you were going to college, and you cheated off somebody else during a test. Well, you're relying on the fact that they're not dumber than you are. So that being the case, think of it this way. So let's say you take a program that was well designed, well thought out, and you take that, you change the name of it, and you use it for your company. Well, that program may not actually cover your industry. It may be lacking in policy. If you haven't updated it, you know what? You might actually be missing programs that you are required to have. So you have to realize that if you have a generic program that, let's say you downloaded online or even took from another company, it may not fit what your organization needs. Now, another huge problem that I see more often than you would think, a company having no goals, or even worse, an unrealistic goal. You see, let's say let's say you have multiple citations with OSHA. Let's say you have a fatality or multiple. You know, to think that, hey, in 6 months, I'm going to go to a world-class performance, it's just not possible. There's too many things to do, and you're going to find you overburden yourself and you overburden the employees working for you. All right, now, another pitfall is having no routine review. And what I mean by this, back to, let's say you had a good health and safety program, and it starts out that way. Well, OSHA regulations update, and as they update, as regulatory requirements change, if you're not reviewing your policy, if you're not reviewing requirements for your company, for your industry, you're going to find that eventually you're falling behind. Now, let's say you are doing that. Let me ask this, who's really participating in reviewing your program and adding to your program? See, I've been guilty of this, Rich. I want to hold on to the safety program, and yes, I need to have some ownership in it, but if I'm single-handedly trying to review, what do we need to do? What do we need to change? What's the next step? And I'm not soliciting feedback from my management team, or I'm not looking for feedback from my employees. You know what's going to happen is eventually, yes, I'm going to own safety, but nobody else is going to own safety. Now, whenever you are building your program or implementing new programs, one thing you have to understand is there's no such thing as a free lunch. And what I mean by that is, let's say my boss goes out and buys me lunch. So for me, that's a free lunch, but for him, he had to pull out his credit card. Now, when I say lack of resource planning, you have to understand there's always a cost to everything we do. So let's say you decide I need to implement such and such training program, see a hazard, new regulation we need to get up to date on. It's out of a 40-hour work week. I need 20 hours of training for every single employee that works for this company. How good of a job have you done really planning that resource? In fact, if you're not working with management, the first thing they're going to see is wasted time and loss of production. So you need to make sure that you are planning how you're going to use resources. Now, when it comes to change, when it comes to managing your program, you have to understand, you have to have a realistic time frame. See, if you're trying to do too much, back to you overburden yourself, you're asking people to change their behaviors, which does take time. But at the same time, you don't want to move too slow. If you're just waiting for an incident, if you're just waiting for other people to choose to change it, it's never going to happen. Now, this means you have to prioritize what change you want to see happen. So just an example, let's say I'm walking through a facility, I'm walking through a project, and I see somebody 30 yards away. They're not wearing their hearing protection, and they are in a loud area. Now, yes, that's something I need to address. However, let's say on this same walk, at the very same time, I notice 30 yards in the other direction, I have people making a confined space entry. Don't see any air monitoring going on. I don't see an attendant. What's my highest priority here? So you want to think the same in the same terms when it comes to what do I change and when do I change it. Now, as you're making changes, you're going to discover that there is resistance to change. So I want to ask you, back to soliciting participation, is change being driven by the safety department and only the safety department, or is it our actual senior management? Are we including them in that process? And at the same time, our employees. Now, do they even understand that we've made changes? Have you notified them? Have you explained what the changes are? Even more importantly, have you explained why you're making those changes? If they don't understand these things, they're never going to start to change their behaviors. Now, with all things, there's always going to be a little bit of training involved. But let me ask you, are you rushing through training just so you can check the box and say, I've met this regulatory requirement? Because if you're rushing through training, or if you have overly generic training, what you're going to find is it's uninformative. You may talk about the need to wear fall protection. You may not actually explain how to use it or how to identify, let's say, what a good anchorage point is. All right. So let's say we're rushing through training or it's uninformative. It doesn't really apply to our industry. What kind of impression does that give to our employees? Is that telling them that, hey, safety regulations, safety rules are important, or is that really saying, you know what, this isn't worth us investing time in, so it's not worth you listening? Now, even past that, Rich, I've seen a lot of companies, they don't train their people. They just expect that the last company trained them, or that they already know the skills that they need to work safely. And that's something we have to recognize, that we need to make sure that our people are trained. We need to make sure they're competent.
Jim, one thing on this training issue of being a common pitfall, and this is a big deal, guys, because your safety training is the foundation of your safety program. If you have well-trained workers who are good at hazard recognition and hazard avoidance, you can save yourself a lot of problems. Another pitfall that we've seen with training is you throw all your training into one day, in a quarter, or even worse, in a year. So let's just think about it. You're with your significant other, your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whoever, and you guys are having a nice, serious conversation. Let's say you're going to work on your relationship, right? Do you have that conversation with that individual on a regular basis? Or do you have it once a year and call it good? The problem with doing The safety training, one time a year or once a quarter, is you lose the message. What kind of message are you sending? If you're talking about safety on a regular basis, monthly training, getting your folks, what you're doing is you're doing a couple of things. Number one is you're sending a message, this is important to us as a company. And number two, you're constantly reinforcing that message. So if you're of that mindset that let's just get it done, get it out of the way, one time a year, we're going to shut down, you're really doing yourself no service, because you're sending that wrong message out to your employees. Poor enforcement. You know, how do we enforce our safety rules? Are we consistent? Are we inconsistent? And what we're talking about there is, you know, you have your production workers or your machinists, you have your supervisors, your team leads, folks like that. Are you holding everybody to the same standard? Are you reminding your safety manager or your production manager to put their safety glasses on the same way that you are doing that to your production workers? So having that consistent or having inconsistent enforcement of your safety rules is going to derail your program in real quick. The other thing about this poor enforcement is that we're going to call that safety cop mentality. That's that gotcha mentality. My job as a safety person is just to catch you, right? You're doing something wrong. Where the safety cop mentality usually stems from is a variety of different places. And number one is inadequate training. You know, being able to do a good job between hazard awareness and hazard recognition.
Which, when we talk about inadequate reinforcement and inadequate discipline, so a lot of people think those are the same things. Reality is enforcement and discipline they're separated a little bit. See, the first step of enforcement isn't writing somebody up. It isn't say, I caught you, I got you. No, the first step is actually training, making sure they understand what the requirement is. Now, the second step to that, the reality is, I don't care how good of a trainer you are and in how many years experience you have doing it, the reality is people are going to miss things. They're going to doze off. They might miss a detail. They may misunderstand what you're telling them. So that being said, a lot of times we have to reinforce what we've already talked about. See, that's the second step of enforcement, making sure that they understand, and if they make mistakes, make sure that we're mentoring them, make sure they understand why that was a mistake, why there's a better way, that we don't want them to get hurt. Now, finally, inadequate discipline. This is the final step of enforcement, all right? And if you're training somebody, explain it to them. Here's the rule, here's the process, the policy we want you to follow, and you verified, okay, you do in fact understand this. And then, okay, you've mentored them a little bit. It gets to the point where now they're making a conscious decision to go against what you're asking them to do. That's where discipline comes in. And a lot of times we're either too quick to discipline somebody, back to that I caught you mentality, I got you, and so we discipline somebody right away, or we keep making excuses for the person. Okay, well, you know what, he's just used to doing it this way. You know what, maybe I need to retrain him, I need to do this, I need to do that. No, it does come to a point where we have to say, here's a line, and if we're not willing to do that, or we're doing it too quickly, that's when we become either the safety cop, or, in the end, it's our fault, not the employee's fault.
And kind of tying into that is that people skill. Too often when we put somebody in a leadership or a management role, we forget that they are actually leading or managing people, and we don't give them the proper training, the proper wherewithal to actually talk to people, to actually inquire, to actually understand why they're doing something or what motivates them. And this last one with the safety cop mentality is that poor operational knowledge. And I had a mentor very, very early in my career that drilled this into me. How can you ask somebody else to do something if you haven't at least tried to put yourself in their shoes. So it's understanding what the process is, it's understanding how things are done, it's understanding the implications of what I'm asking you to do, Jim. It's understanding how that is going to affect you right now, 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, 10 months from now. So it's that, having that core operational knowledge from your safety person is going to derail your safety program.
Now, common pitfalls, a few more. One, having no policies, all right? And sometimes you may not be aware that there's a regulatory policy that you need to comply with. And again, I said earlier, regulations change. And just an example, if you're not reviewing policies, you're not reviewing regulation periodically, you may discover, or well, you may not discover that your program's missing something. So just an example, the silica standard, that changed not too long ago. And so I was discussing a site plan on a construction project with one of my contractors. And my client required that you have some type of silica plan showing how you comply with Table 1. So one of the first things I asked was, how do you comply with the new silica standard? And they stared at me like I had a third eyeball in my forehead. They had no idea that the silica standard had changed. So that's another reason why you need to be doing periodic reviews, because if you're not, you are going to find yourself behind and you're not going to have a chance to improve. You see, if you're not reviewing your program, you're not going to have the opportunity to see problems within the program itself. Now, if you're not able to identify a problem in yourself, you're never going to have that opportunity to correct it and to push your safety program a little further.
Safety as a priority. Now, I want you guys to ask yourself is how many of you have asked yourself or have heard yourself say or heard somebody else say that, safety is our number one priority. I'm going to tell you that's a pitfall, because safety is not your priority. Safety is not your company's priority. Think about it. What is your priority? Let me put it to you this way. Today, everybody that's on here is here because of work. If you were given the opportunity to sit through this without getting paid for it, how many of you guys would actually be here? Because probably not many of you, and that's because your priority is the almighty dollar. That's what your company is in business for. You need to be honest with yourself, okay? And tell, hey, this is my priority. My priority as a business is to make money, but there are a variety of different ways that I make money. Quality, good customer relations, good employee relations, safety, teamwork, communication, all that stuff comes in. Lack of self-awareness. Not being honest with yourself about where you are in the state of your safety program. You guys are rock stars. Let's call it rock stars. Pat yourself on the back. Always keep improving. If you're not, and at the risk again, being blunt, if you suck, you suck. Own it, understand it, move past it. So understanding, and really where we see this as a pitfall is companies who think that their safety program is in that rock star state, and they're not even playing. They think they're a rock star, and they're not even a good garage band. So just being honest with who you are, what your level is going to help you move past that and get to where you are, or get to where you really want to be.
So one problem I see, and you see it at all levels. You can see it through a first line supervisor. You can see it in management teams. You can even see it in the safety department. We don't always lead by example. And what I mean by this is back to having a generic program, having very, very generic training. Let's say I'm not investing in my company's program, and that's not necessarily money, but that's time. Let's say that I'm not giving good training. I'm not getting with my employees and seeking feedback, talking to them. I'm not there coaching people. You know what? At that point, my management team's probably going to pick up on that, And if my management team is picking up on the fact that I don't see this as something worth investing in, they're gonna end up with that same attitude. Now, let me ask you, if your boss does not see safety as a priority, as something worth investing in, something worth the little bit of extra time it takes, and he signs your paycheck, what do you think you're going to end up valuing? All right, you're going to end up valuing get this job done quickly, not let's do it safely. So you want to make sure that we as safety professionals, one, that we're providing that leadership, we're out front, we're showing people, hey, this is important, and at the same time, a term I've heard Rich use before is this: manage upwards. Make sure that you're showing, hey, this is important to our business unit, to our senior management.
So those pitfalls, that's what kind of gets you to where you are, and that's some of the problems that you might be, self-creating for your safety program. So what does a good program look like? Well, number one, you're going to have a written program. A written program is not going to be that cookie cutter, off-the-shelf type of safety program. It's going to be customized to what you need it to be. It's going to address your hazards. It's going to address control of your hazards. It's going to welcome feedback from both sides of the fence. It's going to welcome feedback from the boots on the ground, folks that are turning the wrenches, switching the dials, that type of thing, all the way up to management, where they have that risk management responsibility. Communication is going to be open, clear, concise, welcomed, and solicited or asked for, which means you have to go out and actually ask them, hey, what do you think about this? Are we doing it right? And then here's the hard part, guys. You actually have to listen to them. So you don't have to agree with them. And this is something I tell my kids all the time. Just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that I don't hear you. So I can certainly, take Jim, for example. Jim comes up with some very good ideas, but they're not always timely. Sometimes we have to wait. There's other considerations. But I always want to let Jim know, hey, yeah, I hear you. That's a great idea. But maybe we can do that next quarter. Maybe we can do that next month. Or if it's not a good idea, hey, Jim, I appreciate the feedback, but I don't think it's right for us. You're going to review your program periodically, and you're going to conduct that honest self-assessment. If you notice, that self-awareness and being honest with yourself is kind of a recurring theme with me. I think, this is hey, look, just because you participated doesn't mean you get a trophy. Let's be honest, right? If you're good, you're good. Let's call it that. If you're not so good, you know what? You need to practice more, right? It's going to have some very defined goals, and it's going to have a very defined means of measuring your performance. So here's our goal. How are we doing in relation to that goal? And you're going to conduct that regular gap assessment. Now, that gap assessment starts with, I understand what do I need with my program. That gap assessment is going to say, okay, this is what I need. This is where I am. Where are my gaps? Where are my holes? Where are my problem areas? Implementation is going to have a phased-in approach, and you're going to need to set some very specific priorities. You can't get it all done immediately. So when it comes to your safety program, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at frequency, and we're going to look at severity. And what we're talking about here is, if I have an operation where they're continually working on equipment, down equipment, regular servicing and maintenance, a lot of machine guards, things like that, okay? And so we take that, and then we have another where they have one confined space that they get into every 2-3 years. Well, I walk into a facility like that, and I see no lockout tagout program. I see no confined space program. So I'm going to look at it and say, where is my most where do I have the potential, the highest potential to have a large number of accidents? Where are my higher frequencies of my hazards? Well, in this case, obviously lockout tagout. So I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to fix that problem first, and then I'm going to move on to this other stuff. Because if I take care of those more frequent, more severe type injury potentials, everything else kind of tends to fall in line. My training, it needs to be planned, which means, hey, it's not like, hey guys, tomorrow we're doing safety training. Let people know. Hey, we got safety training. It's every Wednesday at noon. It's every Thursday at 7 a.m., whatever. But it needs to be planned. It needs to be relevant. Quit searching the internet. Quit using the cookie cutter programs. It needs to be tailored to what you guys do. Even something as simple as getting site-specific pictures into the training can make a huge, huge impact. And it needs to meet your needs, not just the regulatory requirements. So we're not looking to just check the box here. It needs to be on point. It needs to be value added. So a few more cliches out there, but that's what it needs to be. You know, we have up there the competency-based training models and the traditional training models. You know, without getting into these in a lot of detail, they both have merits. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. They both have merits, and there's not a right way or a wrong way, as long as your training is relevant, on point, and it meets your needs. And then, you know, lastly, I've already talked about this a little bit. Perform consistently. I am not a fan of that once-a-year type training, just because you lose the message over time. I might do a great job, and we might do our training January 1st, and we spend all day, and we send a great commitment. We bring breakfast in, we bring lunch in, everybody's doing really great, and for the next week, man, we are all about safety. What about February? What about March, April, May? We tend to forget things. You know, the further away we get from those events, the more we forget. Sometimes when we do that consistent safety training, what happens is it's not necessarily about the topic that I'm presenting. It's more about the commitment by the company, and it's more about just keeping safety fresh. We're going to measure success, which means, as Jim mentioned earlier, we're going to set some reasonable goals. And reasonable goals, and I see this time and time again, we'll go into a facility and they have, we're going to just call it zero. Even if it's, you know, and sometimes having a bad safety program is worse than having no safety program. They have nothing, and we'll sit and we'll talk about goals. Well, what do you want to accomplish, and how soon do you want to accomplish this? And, well, we want a complete safety program, and we want no accidents. Well, let's be realistic, you know. How realistic is that zero accident? It's not. So what you're doing is when you set those unreasonable goals, those unrealistic goals, you've already failed, because there's no way for you to achieve that. It's like, you know, asking your kid, it's like telling your kid in high school, you know, let's say he's a high school linebacker, and it's telling that kid that the only way I'm going to consider you a success is if you go play in the NFL. Now, granted, that's a great goal to have, but is it a realistic goal for you to give a high school freshman? You know, so just set some of those reasonable goals. You're going to measure performance continuously. You're going to acknowledge poor performance, and you're going to continually evaluate why you have poor performance. You're going to constantly strive to improve your program or your performance. And you're going to review it regularly. You're going to have some transparency. You're going to get it out to everybody and let everybody know where you're at, which is where we get into this culture of, what we're going to call that culture of change. Once again, you're going to see it. I apologize for the repetition, but honesty, you know, honest self-assessment. You're going to take suggestions. You're going to accept them. You're going to welcome them. You're going to ask for them, and you're going to evaluate them, and you're going to implement the good stuff. But even more importantly, you're going to let everybody know, hey, this is what we're doing. Management of change. This is something that I ran into for the first time, I don't know, a decade ago. I know I've run into some other facilities since that have this. And really what a management of change is getting all stakeholders in play when you're making a significant change to your company, whether it be a production line, a policy change, whatever. So let's say that you are getting ready to drop in a new assembly line into your facility. What you want to do is you want to get all stakeholders. You want to get quality. You want to get sales. You want to get safety. I know getting safety involved in production is a novel concept, but you want to take into consideration safety, environmental. You want to take into consideration all of those things. So everybody can have a say, and you might run across one or two things like, oh man, I didn't think about that. Conversely, if you're going to roll out a new safety program, guess what? We need to get involved. We need to get quality involved. We need to get production involved. We need to get management involved, because too often we do our jobs in a vacuum, and all we worry about is how it affects me. And we fail to understand all the different moving parts of the organization, and it's that domino effect. I push the domino at one end of the room. I'm not thinking about the domino at the very end of that train. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to line all those dominoes up so we can kind of walk through with this management change and understand the implications, of the processes that we are trying to implement.
Now, a good program has to have a management system focus. Now, what I mean by that is not just looking at our lagging indicators, our recordable rates, or our severity rates, but instead looking at the programs that gave us these results. Now, this is a lot of the philosophy that some of you, if you heard of OSAS 18001 or the ISO 45001 standard that's about to replace the OSAS standards. But you want to think of in terms of your program, and a lot of that follows the continuous improvement cycle. All right, when you plan, this is when you're talking about your program, building your written program. Now, this is where you start implementing it. You start training people. You start helping them see their role in that program. Now, check. This is where, like Rich said, you're going to be monitoring your results, seeing, hey, am I successful? Am I on target to hit my goals? Now, sometimes we're not on target. So this is where we start figuring out, what do I need to adjust, and then how do I make my course correction? So what I want you to do when you think of management systems, I want you to think almost in the terms of a root cause analysis. When there's a problem and something's not going right, all right, go ahead and ask yourself up front, do we have a policy that covers this? And if you find you don't have a policy that covers maybe a problem you see on the horizon or types of incidents you're having, hey, at that point, instead of focusing on some knee-jerk reaction, this is where you can focus on, what do I need to change with my program? And that's the same as if you discover my program's not sufficient. I don't have what I need in this program. Or, one thing often, we fail to implement a program correctly. We don't train people. We don't make sure they understand how that program affects them, or we fail to enforce it. All right. If you have a good written program and you don't implement it, or you don't enforce it, at that point, what good's that written program? And then next, accepted risk. Now, you cannot eliminate all risk in your organization. It's just not feasible. But you want to get risk down to an acceptable level. Now, let's say your policy, it doesn't cover a certain type of hazard. It doesn't, or it does, but you have X, Y, Z controls in place, and then you have an incident, right? Maybe your policy, back to insufficient, maybe you knew there was still a hazard, you hadn't eliminated it, but you accepted it. Now, you may find at times this means, you know what, we want to revisit our policies, see if there's something we can do to help mitigate that hazard, help lower that risk. But the main point I want you to take away from this is you want to start focusing on the program itself, not just on the results that it's giving you.
So providing positive safety leadership at all levels is a definite necessity when you start looking at your safety program, and having that good safety program, which means that positive leadership is not just your upper level management. It's not just giving it lip service. It's walking the walk and talking the talk. So So it means when your management goes out onto the shop floor, they put their eye protectors on, they put their hearing protection on, they put their hard hats on. They do the same thing that they are asking everybody else to do. Now we have safety as a value. Earlier I talked about safety as a priority, right? Safety as a priority is what we want to avoid. Now what we do want to have is safety as a value. Now the difference is here. Think again about today. You get up for work, your priorities, coffee, getting the kids up, getting the kids out the door. Once you get that one priority done, you shift to the what? The next priority. You know, getting to work on time, getting your time card done, doing payroll, whatever your job is. Your priorities are shifting throughout the day, minute by minute, day by day, year by year. Your priorities are always shifting. Now, values. Values are those things that we hold dear. We hold those in the utmost importance. And that's things like religion, family, politics, your football team, your baseball team, go Cardinals. You hold those things dear, right? Those things don't change. You get up this morning, you know, family is still important, right? At the end of the day, family is still important. So what we have here is holding safety as a value, and it's understanding its place in the scheme of things. Those values that your organization has are those things that it uses to make itself profitable. Now, something that I did this when I early on in my career, when I first moved to the Toledo area, 20 some odd years ago, I had a vice president who I just could not get through to. He believed in safety, but not at the level that I felt that he needed to. So what I did, this was a construction company. I went back over a 3-year period. I looked at every project that the company had done. This was a larger company. I looked at safety records, I looked at budget, and I looked at quality. Looked at those three markers, okay? And what we showed, and I also looked at schedule, so those 4 markers. What we showed is that any project that we had a safety problem in, every one of them, the budget was blown. Those projects that we had the best safety record, guess what happened to the budget? The company made money. So using this little diagram that we have on the right-hand side of the screen, using that, we were able to, it's just kind of that visual of all these things are values for a company. All of those things go into setting those priorities. The values don't change. We still like safety. We still like quality. We still like our customers. So treating safety as such. And then consistent support of the improvement of the safety program. And it's just simply stated, if safety is a value to the company, our employees are going to learn to value safety. So if the company takes it serious in this regard, the employees will follow. It's that field of dreams, if we build it, they will come type of thing.
Now, and we've talked about assessing your program and knowing where your program's at. Now, Rich, we pull this from Lean Six Sigma, all right? And what it talks about is the maturity of your program, all right? And it starts off with there is no written program, no training, no rules, no requirements. That's level 0. And when you start here, you're relying on individuals to make good, consistent, safe decisions consistently. And the problem with that is once people start thinking rich, you start having problems. All right, that's just a reality. Now, as you move through this, through the levels here, you'll notice there comes a point we do have a written program, but no training. Then we start training, but maybe we're not training, quite, maybe our training's not hitting our objectives. Or, we get to the point where, our written program's good. We've trained people, we've trained them well. And we even get to the point where now we have actual set metrics, set goals that we can measure success with. You even work up to the point where your company, whether safety or management programs, and really the two go together, where you start start really getting into continuous improvement and not just waiting till there's a problem to make course corrections, but really looking at leading indicators. All right, looking for the opportunities to change, not just the times that you have to. So when we said accurately assess our program, that's where we start recognizing what's the maturity of our program, because that a lot of times that can tell you what your corrective actions need to be. Maybe we need to do more training. Maybe we need to implement new programs. All right. So you don't want to just look at necessarily your past safety performance, your lagging indicators, your total reportable rate, maybe your severity rate or EMR. All right. You want to look at these things. Don't get me wrong, but you want to start really asking yourself, do we have the required safety programs that we need? And one big thing, and this may sound silly, but you need to understand what good performance looks like. All right, I had a safety manager one time tell me, we have an EMR of 2.5. That means we're 2.5 times better than all of our competitors. And he really believed this. He had no idea what an EMR was. He had no idea what safety really looked like in the field or what should be happening. The reality is he had no idea that they were performing poorly, and that he had no idea what the problem was. Therefore, he had no idea how to fix it and move forward.
If you're going to fix your program, you need to make sure you conduct a good needs assessment. How can I fix something if I don't even know what do I need? Then we're going to come to that gap assessment that we talked about earlier. So, I understand where I'm at. I understand what I need. Now what I'm going to do is, I understand what I have, I understand what I need. Now I'm going to do that gap assessment. This is basically saying, okay, where are my holes? Where are my stumbling blocks? What do I need to fill in? And conducting that gap assessment is also going to help you set those programmatic priorities to get things fixed. Now what's going to happen is you're going to take a look at this thing, and it's going to be a long litany of priorities. And what you're gonna come down to is like, okay, now where do I start, right? And again, to use that cliche, how do I eat that elephant? Well, I'm going to eat it one bite at a time. I'm going to take a look at things. I'm going to say, okay, these are the changes that I need. These are where my highest frequency or my highest severity potentials are. Highest frequency of accidents, highest severity of accidents. And guess what I'm going to work on? I'm going to work on those. And then any changes that I make are going to be of the realistic variety. And again, what I mean by this realistic variety is that they need to make sense, and they need to have buy-in. How many times have you guys seen head of managers saying, oh, well, we need to do this, we need to start doing this, we need to do this report, we need to do that report, we need to start, tracking this, and you see no value in it. As the end user, you see no value in it. You roll your eyes. The old man doesn't know what he's talking about. This is just a flash in the pan, a knee-jerk reaction, whatever. Now, if you solicit that feedback, hey, Jim, look, man, our lockout tagout program appears to be broken. This is what I think we need to do. What do you think? And typically what you're going to do by soliciting that feedback from the end users, you're doing a couple of things. Number one, you're going to get more realistic solutions. And number two, now I have your buy-in. Jim could be very argumentative with me about most things. I start getting his buy-in, I start using his ideas. It's kind of hard to argue with stuff that you told me that you wanted to see. So, so how do you eat that elephant? And you eat it one bite at a time, and then you move on to the next bite. Change. You got to fix your program, which means you're going to change it. You're going to change that culture. You're going to change the policies, procedures. It's inevitable. Embrace it, love it, nurture it. You want to get that management commitment, and you want to get that management commitment of change. We are in the process of changing our program. Get them to put it in writing. It's just that power of the pen. Involve management in reviewing performance and making recommendations. Take them out on facility walkthroughs and be transparent. Have them talk to the workers about what's going on. You want to have visible change first, and I am a firm believer in this, which means we're going to start picking that low-hanging fruit, which means that, you know what, I go out on a facility floor, I see a bunch of machine guards that are off. I see a bunch of places, points of operation that need to be guarded. We're going to take care of that stuff, and we are going to paint them nice and yellow so everybody sees them. That's you know, kind of taking care of those unsafe conditions. As far as the overall culture, you know, what I like is, one of the first things I like to see are emergency drills, shelter-in-place drills, because it's the easiest way to get everybody involved right now. So, you know, having some visible change, showing some early success, communicating. When you set your priorities, you want some easy stuff, you want some long-term stuff, so you can kind of show that continual change, because if you don't, what happens is you get a lot of stuff done real early. You have all this long-term stuff. In the middle, you show no success, you show no change, you lose any momentum that you have. And then your training and education, the right training at the right time, which means your training needs to be relevant, which means that if Jim isn't a forklift operator, I'm not going to train Jim on how to operate a forklift. If you are working in the office, you step foot on the shop floor once a week, I'm not going to train you as an authorized lockout, tagout employee. So it's understanding and making sure that you do the right training with the right people at the right time.
Now, Rich, let's say you've done all these things that we've talked about. You know, you've built a good written program. You know, it really captures your industry, what you do and what you need. Now, if you stop there, you're going to end up in a bad position. What I mean by that is, back to regulations change, all right? The needs of your industry will change. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's been a lot more automation in the workforce, all right? Now, just that as an example, your safety needs are going to change. You may move from more labor-intensive work to more, you know, more into machine guarding, you know, other considerations, all right? Regulatory requirements change. So if a regulatory requirement changes and you're not reviewing your processes, your procedures, you know, at that point, you're slowly going to start moving backwards. So this is another reason why you want to maintain your program. You want to make sure that you're still conducting regular self-assessments and periodically gap assessments. That's not something you do one time. It's something you need to do on a regular basis. Now, we need to make sure that we continually evaluate what's our performance, what goals are we hitting, you know, and if we're successful, great. Let's set a new goal, all right? Now, at the same time, if we fail, and that's okay, we are going to fail at some point. It happens. Now, if you fail, you really want to identify why. And you don't want to just say, well, we had one employee and he made a bad decision and it's all his fault. No, did we adequately train him? Did we reinforce that and mentor him? Did we fail to discipline him before we ended up having an incident? You want to continue asking, what can we do to improve? Where are those opportunities? And the source of great ideas a lot of times come from your management team, from your employees. You know, going and back to, like Rich said, actively looking for feedback. You know, when you go out into the field or the shop floor and you start asking people, hey, what do you think we should change? How do you think we should change? Do you see a way to help us make this change? A lot of times, one, you get more practical feedback, and at the same time, you're telling that person non-verbally, your opinion is important. You are an important part of the safety program, and that's why I want your feedback. So, some things we need to ask when it comes to building a program. What are the regulatory requirements that are in place that I need to meet, and what programs are going to be beneficial based on the industry I work in? Now, when it comes to regulatory requirements, there are a lot of them out there. For instance, you have to keep records of your accidents and illnesses. So that means you need to understand what a recordable is. You need to be filling out your 300 log, but at the same time, you need to know what's in that regulation. For instance, what's an establishment? if you don't have a firm grasp on the programs, it's going to be very hard to implement.
Now, here's just a few more examples of those changes or those programs that you need to be aware of. You know, take the HAZCOM, for example. That's one of those regulations that's horizontal across most industries. Almost everybody has to have it, your safety data sheets. But this is, you know, staying up to date on the regulation and understanding that 5 years ago, in 2013, there was a new regulation that was passed called globally harmonizing everything. It's understanding all the different moving pieces of a program. For example, lockout, tagout, you know, having a written policy, having machine-specific procedures, having training, auditing your procedures, auditing your authorized employees, understanding that what all those moving pieces are, so you can understand what you need and what you have. And this is just a few more examples without getting into all the details of some various regulations that might require a written program. Doesn't mean this is all that you have to comply with. These are just some of the ones that, you know, you have to put pen to paper and have some specific procedures documented. So with that, see if we have any questions. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type them in now. At this point, we have no questions, which means we must have done a really good job. Just to let everybody know, on the left-hand side is some upcoming open enrollment classes that we are offering here and at Northwest State Community College in Archbold. As you see, you know, February 28th, we have, you know, arc flash training. Out there, we have some respirable silica. We're doing a longer version of this program on how to fix your safety program. I do have one question that just came up, and yes, we will be emailing a certificate for your proof of attending the training for BWC. You should see those within the next 5 to 7 working days. Additionally, some other open enrollment classes that are coming available throughout 2018. I do want to let everybody know that we are now a SHRM provider. That's the Society of Human Resource Management. So if you do need to obtain certification points for your recertification for your SHRM, please let us know. Typically, our open enrollment courses are good for about 4 contact hours or 4 PDCs. So if you're interested, you can, you know, visit us at www.cardinalhs.net or visit us on our website. Can we get a copy of the material from today's program? Yes, if you are interested in receiving a copy of the material, you can email me at rich@cardinalhs.net, and I will get you a copy of our program. Another question. Let me see here. Question is, what do you suggest for companies that have a fleet of about 20 employees and it's very hard to get everyone in for safety training at one time? A variety of different ways that you can do safety training. And Jim, I want you to speak up in here too. You can do your traditional classroom training, which in my opinion is always the best because I have that interaction, right? I mean, I have that immediate feedback. I can answer questions. You can also do the webinar or the go-to-meeting type format, which is very similar to what we are doing here. And while that feedback might not be as good because you can't look at somebody, you're always that fear of, you know, one of you guys playing on your, you know, playing Angry Birds on your phone or looking at a magazine or something like that. But that's to me, that would be the second best. And then lastly, is you have that computer-based training or that web-based training. Kind of more checking the box than you are actually doing training.
Which, Rich, one thing I agree with you 100%. I prefer face-to-face training. Now, reality is, I don't care how large your organization is, it's going to be very difficult to get everybody together at the same time to be able to conduct training. So this is one of those times You may want to try to get a certain number of people every day, every week, every month for training, where you're pulling maybe, however many you can, having that honest face-to-face discussion, and then over time, getting everybody through your training program.
Okay, another question. What if you don't have the resources to maintain a program? For example, one health and safety manager for 4 locations in 3 states. Be creative. I've been in that situation before. When I first moved to Toledo, I was safety director for a company that was global. We had offices in Guam, we had offices in Afghanistan, we were at work in Iraq, we had work on Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, as well as within the lower 48, Hawaii, Alaska. I mean, we were all over the place, right? So you had to be creative. In that situation, what we did is I went to an online training type of situation, a web-based training, but once a year, and this is where you got to be creative. And I'm going to kind of contradict some stuff I said earlier. Once a year, we put everybody, all of our supervisors, through a 30-hour training class. Didn't worry about it; it never expired. Once a year, we pulled everybody in, and that was about 100 and something people that we pulled in at different locations. We went to them. I did one in Denver, did one in New Jersey, did them in Toledo. We did all that, right? So what we had is we had about a 3 or 4 pronged approach. Our 30-hour class, because I wasn't as concerned about our guys getting that 30-hour card, I was a little bit able to modify it a little bit. So what we focused on was teaching them the information that they needed to teach their employees. So when you get into those multiple locations as a safety manager, what you end up doing is you end up training your managers in those locations, or your leads in those locations, on how to do a good safety meeting, on the relevant information. And then you kind of supplement that with some web-based training, some webinar type stuff. So that's kind of been my approach to that.
Which, Rich, just, and to quote you yet again, all right, remember, you got to eat the elephant one bite at a time. If you're missing written programs, you're not going to get every single one written in a day, in a week. It's going to take time, especially when you have multiple locations and you don't have support with additional safety.
Another question that we have is there a certain number of employees at one site that correlates to the need for an HS&E person? Absolutely not, because that depends on a variety of things. Number one, it depends on the state of your program. If you have a very robust, healthy safety program, safety culture, in my experience, you typically don't need a more senior safety person, because management is kind of leading that charge as a group. Also depends on your industry, depends on how high of a hazard industry you're in. So I've got clients that have 200, 300, 400 people, and they operate off a safety committee and a human resources manager. That works for them because their safety culture is very robust. It's very healthy. I have some clients that have 50 people, and I think they need 4 people out there because they're not quite there yet. So Mike, I wish I could give you an answer. If you're getting a number like 100 per person from your local area OSHA office, they're wrong. There is nothing out there. That is just a personal preference based on a variety of different considerations.
Just one thing to add to that. Now, remember, if you're working as a subcontractor to another company, a lot of times companies will have individual trigger amounts. Oh, if you have 15, you have 20, you have 50, you have to have a safety person. Oh, if you have for every 25 more. And so if you're working as a subcontractor, and you'll see this especially in construction, you want to make sure that you have the details of what the contract says, maybe what a site plan says, and make sure that you've read that. So that way you can prepare for that requirement.
If there are no more questions, I do believe we got to all of them. Let me double check real quick before I let everybody go. And it does appear that I've got everybody answered. With that, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. We will be sending out additional information on upcoming webinars. I do appreciate the questions and the consideration today. In the meantime, if you can think of any questions that you have at the end of our webinar, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us here in our office. Phone number is 419-882-9224. Thank you very much and have a great day.